Okay, so Nicaragua, the second poorest country in Latin America after Haiti, and one of America's favorite punching bags in Central America. Nicaragua appears to be on the checkoff list for future American regime change, and a lot of the Florida Republican neocons are rooting for this. So after the U.S. decided to launch a special forces team to arrest and capture Venezuela's dictator Nicolas Maduro, many in the Trump administration, Marco Rubio, and many of the Florida neocons, like Senator Rick Scott, are naming the other countries they desire as part of this checkoff list. And in addition to Cuba, yes, Nicaragua and its leader Daniel Ortega are pretty high on the list. So this little country in Central America, known as Nicaragua here, the United States has a long history of intervention in Nicaragua. And in this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about that context and how it plays out to right now, what Marco Rubio and Donald Trump and many in the GOP want to do right now in Nicaragua. Earlier in the video, I said that Nicaragua has been one of the favorite punching bags in the United States and Central America. And what did I mean by that? The United States has a long history of intervention in Nicaragua. Over 100 years ago, in the early 20th century, the United States invaded Nicaragua in 1912 and occupied the country for 21 years until 1933. The context was a period known as the Banana Wars, which was roughly around 1898 until 1934. Nicaragua was one of those countries, banana-producing countries in Central America and the Caribbean. In Nicaragua's case, in Central America. And the United States decided to use its military as backup enforcers for American fruit corporations, notably the Standard Fruit Company and the United Fruit Company, who wanted to dominate land and resources in banana-producing countries. During the Banana Wars, the United States did interventions in Cuba, Haiti, Dominican Republic, Honduras, and Nicaragua. And in the 1930s, during the Great Depression, after the stock market crashed in 1929, America ran out of money to keep being in these countries, and so America finally pulled out in 1933 from Nicaragua. After the U.S. withdrawal from Nicaragua in 1933, the country later came under the dictatorship of a man named Anastasio Somoza Garcia in 1936 when he did a military coup, and the United States backed his dictatorship. And later it turned into a family dictatorship where his two sons took over after he was killed in the 50s. So the Somoza family ruled a cruel, corrupt, greedy dictatorship from the 1930s until the 1970s when they were overthrown in an armed revolution by 1979. The next major American intervention against Nicaragua came in the 1980s, after the guerrilla group known as the FSLN, or the Sandinistas, had successfully overthrown the Somoza dictatorship by 1979. They set up a very left-wing revolutionary socialist government from 1979 until 1990. The United States hated this and opposed them. And so then we got what was called the Contra War. The United States hated Daniel Ortega, who was the president of Nicaragua from 1985 until 1990. The United States supported Nicaraguans who didn't like the Sandinistas, who formed these paramilitary groups called the Contras. Many of them were former National Guard soldiers from the Somoza dictatorship. And they did terrorist attacks in Nicaragua to try to overthrow the Nicaraguan government, which never worked. And the United States put an economic embargo on Nicaragua from 1985 until 1990. So now we fast forward to right now and why so many Republicans are considering Nicaragua to be part of the regime change checkoff list. That has to do with the political return of Daniel Ortega. Daniel Ortega, between 1990 and 2006, tried over and over to get voted back into office. And actually, surprisingly, in 2007, the people of Nicaragua voted for him. And he came back as president of Nicaragua in 2007. And the United States government was not happy about it. The Bush administration was very displeased by that. During the first 10 years of Daniel Ortega's return to being president of Nicaragua, yes, he did become an autocrat and eventually even made his wife, Rosario, his vice president. But it wasn't really until 2018 when Ortega started resorting to becoming a very despotic, authoritarian dictator, using brutal police, military force on protesters. So from 2018 onwards, Daniel Ortega has resorted to jailing all of his opposition and ordering brutal military force crackdowns on protests against him. And yeah, the country is not doing well at all right now. It's under a very authoritarian dictatorship. So, as Nicaragua is on the regime change list, Daniel Ortega, what would the U.S. end up doing if the Trump administration really is serious in wanting to depose Ortega? Well, I don't think that the U.S. is going to try to do the Contra method again. What they probably would do is Trump would probably send in some special forces team, kind of like in Venezuela, to probably try to do a snatch and grab capture of Daniel Ortega and his wife Rosario. Similar to Venezuela, when the United States removed Nicolas Maduro from power and his wife, the rest of the Venezuelan dictatorship was left in power by the United States, and the people of Venezuela are still not free yet. So if the U.S. were to just capture Daniel Ortega and his wife, the rest of the dictatorship in Nicaragua would still be left in power. So would the Trump administration try to do a total removal of the Nicaraguan regime? I don't know. That is to be seen. What I lastly want to close on this video is if the United States is very much set, if the Trump administration is determined to topple the regime in Nicaragua as well as Cuba, or do even more intervention in Venezuela, one of the biggest risks is instability, and with that, immigration crisis, where people in those countries, once their country's in chaos and disorder, will flee their country and try to head for the United States. And it just compounds the illegal immigration problem. For example, in the 1980s, when the United States was trying to destabilize Nicaragua, supporting the Contras and doing an embargo on Nicaragua, one of the consequences of it, of course, were refugees, Nicaraguans fleeing the violence and heading towards Mexico and the United States, which led to a huge immigration problem during the 1980s for the United States. And the United States kept trying to deport people from Central America, including Nicaraguans, but more kept coming. So eventually the United States ended up doing an amnesty deal in 1986 because they just couldn't deport all the refugees from Central America illegally entering the United States. So whatever interventions that might be happening, regime changes, it can result in an immigration crisis for the United States.